Decapitation, myth and toxic vegetation. This has to be their best album. Nursery Cryme with Genesis has it all. There are lavish moments of musical indulgence, flights for the imagination, and quieter moments of musical whimsy. There's a charm to it as it weaves its tales, drawing upon the uncanny and the surreal. There is a dark Victoriana that's evoked in this one. One is reminded, of course, of the Beatles' own foray into our industrialised and top-hatted past, with their being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. But whereas the Beatles employ a swirling psychedelia and mawkish sentiment, Genesis prefer to draw on the darker, more gothic elements of 19th century literature and fairy tale. Peter Gabriel had said, of course, that indeed is where its influences lie. The musical box is full of repressed sexuality and violence. Of course, The Lamb would lend itself quite well to a Freudian reading, but I think this one would have him dropping his cigar into his cocoa, with the young Cynthia decapitating Henry, who then re-emerges from the musical box as a wrinkly old groper. Gabriel toys with us with terms of the tone and the dynamic range of the music, as simple, familiar lines like "Old King Cole was a merry old soul" are delivered with a chilling exactitude. They pour out of this nursery room drama, building up to a psychosexual frenzy. If I may quote Chris Welsh, Peter brings astonishing sensuality to the pronouncement of the key word flesh, before embarking on an orgy of shouting from the rooftops, or blood on the rooftops perhaps. Chris Welsh, of course, goes on to describe this as their most crucial album. I'm tempted to add most intriguing as well. A huge step up is taken, of course, with the addition of Phil Collins, who strengthens the rhythm section, brings a whole new dimension to their sound of his percussive playing, and Steve Hackett fleshes out the guitar sound and adds these gorgeous little touches like the musical box refrain, and his playing has been noted as combining both melodic and violent outbursts. Rolling Stone said of this that the overall production was a bit murky and just bubbles away quietly. Although despite its limitation in terms of sound, BBC's music has gone on to praise its snappy drums and Hackett's armoury of tapping and swelling techniques that broaden the palette of the band. This prog gothic evokes a sense of the uncanny amid all the prog pageantry. A dark Victoriana 19th century shaggy dog stories, vegetation gone wild, tales of English rural life, as well as a Bognor restaurant owner who disappears after cutting off his own toes and serving them for tea. And let's not forget mythological renderings deemed way too sexy for Italian radio.
Do you really think the Fountain of Salamassus is way too sexy for Italian radio?
Indeed. That was extraordinary, wasn't it? You know, that apparently it had been banned because a woman somewhere who was a controller, the equivalent of Auntie the BBC, decided that it was too sexy, perhaps because of the hermaphrodites, or perhaps it was because of the crescendos, which I know somebody compared those sort of crescendos to, you know, a series of orgasms. And so if music is allowed to exist at its fullness, then we can have orgasms and eargasms to our heart's content.
And the giant hogweed, Herculean Mantagazzi, I mean, what a triumph that is, which feeds into that atmosphere of Victorian menace. It's an album full of wonders, and one wonders what on earth they were thinking. But this train of thought ultimately leads them to the most underrated of albums, a dangerous proposition. A wolf in lamb's clothing, perhaps. This album, of course, is where all the pieces fall into place, where their signature sound is cemented, I think. True English eccentrics, part Lewis Carroll, part Syd Barrett, perhaps. From Baroque stylings to this hymnal pastoral musings, and how the musicality of the band is elevated by the inclusion of Hackett and Collins. Music that is enjoyed by geography teachers everywhere. Nursery Cryme's genius lies not only in the concepts, as charming as they are, but also in the musical stylings, from the long involved multi-movemented pieces to striking that wonderful balance of atmosphere between the macabre and the fairy tale and myth and God knows what else. From the urgency and proto-metal of The Plague of the Russian Triffids to the whimsy and pathos of For Absent Friends. The first use of Collins' vocal as well, a track heavily influenced by the Beatles' Eleanor Rigby. The Ealing comedy of Harold the Barrel. It's a smorgasbord of impressions for the burgeoning prog palette, which is why this is such an important record, building on from that clarion call from King Crimson in 1969. This band, rather than the twisted maniacal sneer of 21st century schizoid man, embrace their own genre, Edwardian rock. This album is full of menace, but unlike The Lamb, I think it's more coherent. It has aged better, I think, than perhaps Selling England by the Pound, whose exploration of nationalism is viewed as slightly uncomfortable these days. Maybe Foxtrot is the only album that betters it, I don't know. But the musical texture is an extraordinary mellotron, a mellotron, of course, that Steve Hackett purchases from Robert Fripp, a fire-damaged mellotron at that, adds a palpable sense of melancholy to the music, suggesting the shifting musical topography of what was to come. It's an intriguing album full of whimsical tales and ideas. It lacks the muddled brilliance that is The Lamb, of course, and it lacks the thematic drive of Selling England by the Pound. It has an innocence, a simplicity and coherence, and a vital stepping stone, undoubtedly a vital stepping stone, in terms of its ideas. Do they better it? This is a stone that holds everything together, I think, and it's interesting to watch Gabriel stalking around the stage in various states of dress and costumes, while the rest of them are haunched over their instruments, like they're trying to discover the meaning of calculus. It makes for a rather potent and interesting contrast. It provides that vital bridge between the acoustic whimsy of the Trespass album, although that was an album that did boast the knife, of course, and the gothic grandeur of what was to come. Lester Bangs would argue that this was hardly rock and roll. It was hardly Grand Funk or the Stooges, more Charterhouse and Full House. Hogweed is my second favourite track on this album. It possesses a dizzying urgency. As the headlines are shouted out, we are alerted to the fact that the giant hogweed is about to conquer Britain. The story of a kind of infestation, if you will. One that's full of satirical goodness and could probably well be applied today, I think. As a country we embark on this herbicidal battering, Collins' cymbals clash, scythe-like at the organic growths all around him as the band lash out amidst the dense foliage of the rhythm. Gabriel also hacks away in his best declaiming style, telling how a Victorian explorer brought the offending vegetation from the Russian shores. Oh, those pesky Ruskies, eh? Bringing the offending plant back to the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, where the seeds have spread, threatening the human race. Seven Stones is an historical allegory building on that sense of myth and parable. Beautiful employment of mellotron on this one as well. And the Fountain of Salamassus. Special emphasis placed on the power chords, swoop and swell, all ushering this track to its majestic conclusion. Overall, I'd have to say, this is such a kooky album, but it's one that I believe that should be considered for the top spot in the Genesis discography. I realise that my own ranking, which you can check out, I'll put a card up there for you, puts this one in the top 5, I think. But like all these wonderful bands and these wonderful albums are constantly moving and shuffling about in these rankings, including my own. Anyway, what do you think? How important is this album? Is this really possibly the best Genesis album ever? Let me know what you think. Please leave your wonderful comments below. Do click like, subscribe, share this video if you've enjoyed it. Do click that notification bell, it makes all the difference to the algorithm. And check out some of the links below the video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. Your time and patience is appreciated. I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, as you know, hope you're well, you're staying safe, and that you keep listening.